You don't belong in this room. The sentence didn't just hang in the air, it cut through it, sharp and cold, as the fluorescent lights hummed above and the steady beep of the cardiac monitor stuttered for just a fraction of a second, enough to make every head turn and every breath pause. 6 minutes on the wall clock and counting down fast, while 3 senior doctors in pressed coats stood around the bed of a wounded Navy SEAL commander, their voices overlapping, their confidence cracking under pressure. And just beyond the glass doors stood Ava Brooks, hands clasped, posture straight, eyes locked on the chaos inside. The new black nurse they had laughed about not 10 minutes ago, the one they told to stay out of critical cases, the one they said should watch and learn instead of think. But Ava wasn't watching. She was reading every movement, every number, every hesitation. Her mind piecing together what didn't fit while inside the room the tension tightened like a wire pulled too far. Someone called out the wrong assumption. Someone reached for the wrong approach, and the monitor dipped again. That sound. Lower now, slower, heavier, like the room itself was holding its breath, and Ava felt it. That shift. That moment where pride was louder than truth, where authority was louder than instinct, and she stepped forward just half an inch before stopping herself. Because this was not her place, not according to them. Not according to the quiet hierarchy that had already decided who she was before she ever spoke. But something in her didn't sit still, something built from long nights, from proving people wrong without ever raising her voice, from knowing that being underestimated wasn't a weakness, it was a window. And inside the room one of the doctors muttered, "We're losing him." The words barely audible, but heavy enough to drop the temperature 10 degrees. And for a split second, no one moved, no one led. No one knew. And that silence said more than any title ever could. Ava's eyes narrowed just slightly as the pattern finally clicked. Something subtle, something everyone else missed, not because it was invisible, but because they weren't looking for it. And in that exact moment the line between waiting and acting snapped clean in two. She reached for the door, paused just long enough to hear the echo of that sentence again, "You don't belong," and then pushed it open anyway. The sound of it slicing through the room like a decision that couldn't be undone. Her steps measured, her voice calm but unshakable as she said a single word that didn't ask for permission, didn't apologize, didn't explain, just commanded, "Move." And for the first time since the chaos began, the room listened, not because of who she was supposed to be, but because of what she saw that they didn't, and somewhere between doubt and desperation, everything shifted without anyone realizing yet just how much was about to change. The room did not explode into action. It shifted, subtle but undeniable, like gravity had quietly changed direction. Ava Brooks stepped closer to the bed, her eyes never leaving the monitor as the numbers flickered in uneven rhythm. Not random, never random. She had seen this pattern before, not in a classroom, not in a textbook, but somewhere louder. Somewhere where hesitation cost more than reputation. "His pressure is not dropping from trauma," she said, her voice steady, controlled, cutting through the overlapping voices that had filled the room seconds ago. One of the doctors frowned. Another opened his mouth to object, but neither finished, because something in her tone did not invite debate. It demanded attention. Ava reached for the chart, scanned it once, then set it down as if she already knew what it would say. "You are treating the symptom, not the cause," she added, and for a moment the room pushed back, not with words, but with silence loaded with doubt, with ego, with the quiet resistance of people who were not used to being corrected, especially not by someone they had dismissed. But the monitor dipped again, a sharp reminder that time did not care about hierarchy, and that was when hesitation broke. One of the nurses stepped aside first, then another, until space opened where there had been resistance. Ava moved into it without rush, without panic, her hands precise, her focus absolute. She called out instructions, not loud, not aggressive, just certain. And something unexpected happened. They followed, not because they trusted her yet, but because they had run out of better options. The air felt different now, tighter, more focused. Every second measured not in minutes, but in heartbeats. Ava adjusted one detail, then another, small changes that most would overlook. But together they shifted the entire trajectory. The monitor responded, just slightly at first, then again, stronger, steadier, like a signal finding its path again, and the room felt it. That almost invisible turn where failure begins to lose its grip. One of the doctors looked at her, really looked this time. Confusion replacing certainty, because this did not fit the version of her they had already decided on. Ava did not notice, or if she did not react, because she was not here to prove them wrong. She was here to make sure the man on that bed had a chance. Seconds stretched, then tightened, then finally released as the rhythm stabilized into something recognizable, something alive. The machine no longer sounded like a warning, but like a promise being carefully rebuilt, and that was when the tension cracked, not with noise, but with a collective exhale no one admitted to taking. Ava stepped back just half a step, not claiming the moment, not announcing anything, just watching to make sure it held. And for the first time since she walked in, no one spoke, because they all knew something had shifted, something they could not easily explain. The authority in the room had not disappeared, but it had been interrupted, rewritten in real time by someone they never expected. And then, just as the quiet settled, the man on the bed moved, barely, a small shift of his hand, a flicker beneath his eyelids, enough to pull every eye toward him. Ava's gaze softened just slightly, not relief, not yet, but recognition, as if she had been waiting for that exact sign. And when his eyes finally opened, slow and heavy, scanning the room with the instinct of someone trained to assess before speaking, they landed on her, not by accident, not by chance, but with a focus that felt intentional. And in that moment, something unspoken passed between them, something deeper than gratitude, deeper than coincidence, and no one in that room understood why the air suddenly felt heavier, as if a story had just begun unfolding that none of them were prepared for. No one moved to congratulate her, not yet, because the room was still trying to understand what had just happened, the kind of silence that was not empty but full, heavy with questions no one was ready to ask. Ava Brooks stood at the edge of the bed, her posture calm, her breathing steady, as if the last few minutes had not rewritten everything they thought they knew about her. But inside that stillness was something sharper, something aware, because she could feel the shift, the weight of eyes that no longer dismissed her but did not yet know where to place her. And then the man on the bed drew in a deeper breath, slow, controlled, like someone trained to return from the edge without panic, his gaze steady despite the fatigue, scanning the room not with confusion but with intention, as if he was mapping it, understanding it. And when his eyes found Ava again, they did not slide past her. They held, locked in a way that made the air tighten just slightly. One of the doctors cleared his throat, stepping forward as if to reclaim authority, beginning to explain the situation in careful, measured words. But the commander did not look at him, did not acknowledge the explanation. His attention stayed exactly where it was, on Ava. And something in that moment unsettled the room more than any alarm could have, because respect, real respect, does not follow titles, it follows recognition. Ava felt it too, that weight of being seen, not as a role, not as a label, but as something else entirely, something earned in a place far beyond this hospital. And she tilted her head just slightly, studying him the way she had studied the monitor earlier, searching for the piece that connected. Because there was something familiar in his eyes, something she could not place yet but could not ignore. The commander shifted, just enough to lift his hand a few inches, the motion small but deliberate, and every person in that room watched it like it meant something they had not been taught to understand. His fingers steadied, his arm trembling just slightly under the effort, and then, without a word, he raised his hand to his brow in a precise, unmistakable salute, not rushed, not weak, but exact, like muscle memory stronger than exhaustion. The gesture hung in the air, clear and undeniable, and for a second no one reacted because no one knew how to. The most decorated man in that room was not saluting the lead doctor, not acknowledging the senior staff, but directing that respect toward the one person they had dismissed. Ava did not move right away. Her expression did not change, but something behind her eyes sharpened, because now the pieces were beginning to align, not fully, not yet, but enough to stir something deeper than surprise, something that reached back beyond this room, beyond this moment, into a memory that had been buried under time and distance. The commander's hand slowly lowered, but his gaze never broke. And when he finally spoke, his voice was rough but steady, carrying a weight that did not need volume. "I know you," he said, and the words landed differently than anything else that had been said that day. Not as a question, not as confusion, but as certainty. And that was when the room truly changed, because now this was no longer just about a life saved. It was about a story no one else in that room had been part of, a connection that did not follow their rules. And Ava's breath caught just slightly, almost invisible, as the past began to press quietly against the present, waiting to be revealed. The words did not echo, they settled, heavy and deliberate. "I know you." And for a moment no one in that room knew what to do with them, because recognition was not part of the script they had been following. Ava Brooks did not answer right away. Her eyes stayed on him, searching deeper now, not just as a nurse assessing a patient, but as someone trying to unlock a memory that refused to come all at once, something distant, something wrapped in urgency and noise and a version of herself that existed long before this hospital badge ever did. The room shifted uneasily as Dr. Hayes stepped forward again, attempting to regain control of a moment that was slipping further from his reach. His voice carefully measured as he said the commander needed rest, needed quiet, needed the professionals to take over. But even as he spoke, it was clear that authority alone was not enough anymore. Not after what everyone had just witnessed. The commander barely turned his head, his attention still anchored to Ava, as if the rest of the room had faded into background noise. "You were there," he continued, slower now, each word placed with intention, and something in Ava's expression flickered, not confusion, not denial, but recognition beginning to rise to the surface, like a reflection finally becoming clear in still water. Her fingers tightened slightly at her sides as the pieces began to connect, not through logic, but through instinct, through a feeling she had learned to trust long before she ever stepped into this building. The commander shifted again, the effort visible but controlled, his voice quieter now, but no less certain. "Desert Unit, 3 years ago." And that was it. That was the key, the moment everything aligned. Ava's breath caught just slightly, her posture changing almost imperceptibly as the memory finally surfaced, not in fragments, but in a full, undeniable wave. The heat, the pressure, the urgency of a place where decisions were made in seconds and carried weight far beyond reputation. A place where she had not been introduced as the new nurse. A place where no one had the luxury of underestimating anyone else. Her mind flashed back to that environment, to the long hours, the constant tension, the unspoken understanding that everyone there was measured not by appearance, but by action. And suddenly the man in front of her was no longer just a patient, no longer just a commander in a hospital bed. He was someone she had seen before under very different circumstances, someone whose life had once crossed hers in a moment that demanded clarity, not hesitation. Ava exhaled slowly, grounding herself back in the present, but her eyes had changed now, sharper, deeper, carrying the weight of that realization. The room felt it again, that shift, that invisible current moving beneath the surface. Dr. Hayes stopped speaking, not because he chose to, but because something in the dynamic had made his words irrelevant. The hierarchy that once defined this room was no longer holding its shape, because now there was a history no one else shared, a context they could not interrupt. Ava stepped closer, just slightly, her voice calm but different now, not uncertain, not restrained, but anchored in something stronger than either. "You made it through," she said quietly, and it was not just a statement about his condition. It was an acknowledgement of something deeper, something that existed outside this moment. The commander's expression softened, not into weakness, but into recognition, the kind that does not need explanation. And for the first time since she entered the room, Ava was not being seen as someone trying to prove herself. She was being seen as someone already proven, and that changed everything, because now the question was no longer who she was, but why no one else had seen it sooner. The room did not return to normal. It could not, because something invisible had already been broken and rebuilt in a way no one could reverse. Ava Brooks stood there with the weight of recognition settling into her posture, not heavy, not overwhelming, but steady, like something she had carried before and knew how to hold. The commander's words still hung in the air, not loud, but undeniable. And for the first time since the shift began, the people in that room were no longer looking at her with assumption. They were looking at her with questions, the kind that come too late. Dr. Hayes shifted his stance, his confidence no longer sharp but searching, trying to reframe what he had just witnessed into something that made sense within his world. But there was no easy explanation, because this was not about procedure, it was about presence. Ava did not speak to fill the silence. She let it stretch, because silence, when it is earned, says more than defense ever could. One of the nurses glanced between her and the commander, then back again, as if trying to piece together a story that had clearly started long before this moment. The commander's breathing steadied further, each inhale more controlled, more grounded, his strength returning not in bursts, but in quiet, deliberate increments. And still his attention did not drift. It stayed on Ava with a focus that carried respect without needing to announce it. "You kept everyone calm," he said after a moment, his voice low but clear enough to reach every corner of the room. And that sentence landed differently than praise. It was not about skill alone. It was about something deeper, something that cannot be taught in training manuals or measured in certifications. Ava's eyes softened just slightly, not from validation, but from understanding, because she knew exactly what he meant. In places where pressure erases titles, calm becomes the most valuable skill of all. Dr. Hayes finally spoke again, but this time, his voice carried less certainty, more caution. "You have prior experience in this type of case?" he asked, the question careful, almost hesitant, as if stepping onto unfamiliar ground. Ava turned her head toward him slowly, not defensive, not confrontational, just present. "I have seen enough to recognize when something does not add up," she replied, and the answer did not give him what he wanted. It gave him something else, something harder to categorize, something that did not fit neatly into his assumptions. The room absorbed that, the shift continuing, subtle but unstoppable, because once perception changes, it does not easily return to what it was before. Another nurse adjusted a line, following Ava's earlier instructions without even thinking about it now, as if the authority had already been reassigned in ways no one had formally declared. And that was the moment the truth became unavoidable, not spoken, not announced, but felt by everyone present. Respect had moved, not completely, not permanently, but enough to change the balance. Ava stepped back half a step again, giving space, not claiming control, because she never needed to own the room to influence it. She had already done what mattered, and as she turned slightly, preparing to step out of the center, the commander spoke once more, quieter this time, but no less certain. "They do not know who you are," he said, not as a criticism, not as a complaint, but as a simple statement of fact. And Ava paused, just for a fraction of a second, her expression unreadable, because she understood something the room was only beginning to realize. Sometimes it is not about making people see you. It is about what happens when they finally do. And in that space between who they thought she was and who she actually was, everything had already begun to change. The words settled deeper than anyone expected. "They do not know who you are." And for a moment the room held its breath again, not because of urgency this time, but because something unspoken had just been exposed. Ava Brooks did not turn back immediately, her hand resting lightly against the edge of the station as if grounding herself in the present, because she understood what those words could do if she let them, how quickly they could shift the room from curiosity to judgment, from respect to discomfort, and she had never needed that kind of attention to do her job. But the silence pressed in, waiting, and Dr. Hayes, who had built his authority on certainty, now found himself standing in uncertainty, his eyes narrowing slightly as he studied her, not with dismissal anymore, but with something closer to calculation. "Then maybe it is time we understand," he said, the tone careful, measured, but edged with something he could not fully hide, something between pride and unease. Ava finally turned back, her expression calm, composed, not defensive, because she was not here to explain herself. She was here to do the work, and yet the room had shifted into a place where the work alone was no longer the focus. Now it was about her, about the gap between what they assumed and what they were beginning to see. The commander watched the exchange without interrupting, his presence steady, his gaze unwavering, as if he already knew how this would unfold, because he had seen rooms like this before, where truth walked in quietly and forced everyone to reevaluate what they thought they understood. Ava met Dr. Hayes's eyes for a brief second, then spoke, her voice even, controlled, carrying no need for approval. What matters is that he is stable, she said, redirecting the moment back to where it belonged. But even as she said it, she knew that was not enough anymore. Not for them. Not after what had just happened. One of the younger nurses stepped closer, unable to hold back the question forming in her mind. Have you worked in military care before? She asked softly. The curiosity genuine, not challenging, and Ava paused, not because she did not have an answer, but because she understood the weight of giving one. The room leaned in slightly, not physically, but in attention, waiting for something that would define her in a way they could understand. Ava exhaled slowly, choosing her words with care. I have been in places where decisions had to be made quickly, she said. And again, it was not the full answer, but it was enough to shift the air once more, because it hinted at something deeper without placing it on display. Dr. Hayes studied her response, clearly unsatisfied, because it did not fit into a clear category he could label, and that unsettled him more than if she had simply confirmed or denied his assumption. The commander's voice cut through the tension again, calm but firm. She is the reason I am here, he said, and that changed everything. Because now the recognition was no longer subtle. It was spoken, direct, undeniable. The room reacted, not loudly, but in small shifts, glances exchanged, postures adjusted, as if everyone was recalibrating at once. Ava felt it. The weight of that statement, heavier than the salute, because this was no longer about a moment. It was about history, about proof that existed beyond this room. And for the first time since she walked in, the narrative they had built around her began to fall apart. Completely, not in pieces, but all at once, and in its place stood something they had not prepared for, something that did not ask for permission, did not seek validation, but simply existed as truth. Ava did not step forward, did not claim the space that had opened, because she did not need to. The shift had already happened, and everyone in that room knew it, whether they were ready to admit it or not. The sentence did not fade. It expanded. She is the reason I am here. And it landed with a kind of weight that no credential on the wall could match. The room did not react all at once. It shifted in layers, first the silence, then the glances, then the quiet recalculation happening behind every pair of eyes. Ava Brooks stood still, not absorbing the attention, not rejecting it either, just letting it pass through her like something she had learned not to chase, because recognition had never been the goal. Survival had been, clarity had been, doing the right thing when it mattered had been. Dr. Hayes looked at the commander now, not Ava, as if trying to confirm what he had just heard, as if authority could be restored by redirecting the conversation. You were saying she treated you before? He asked, his voice controlled but tighter than before. The commander did not rush his answer. He did not need to. His presence alone held the room in place. She did more than that, he said. Steady, unshaken, and again the words did not raise volume, but they raised impact. Ava felt the shift ripple outward, the room no longer questioning if she had experience, but how much, and more importantly, why none of them had known. One of the nurses stepped back slightly, as if giving her space without realizing it, as if instinct was catching up to truth. Ava's gaze moved across the room slowly, not searching for approval, not seeking validation, but observing, the same way she had done from the beginning, the same way that had allowed her to see what others missed. And in that observation she saw it clearly now, the difference in posture, in tone, in silence. Respect had entered the room quietly, but it was there, undeniable. Dr. Hayes adjusted his stance again, his confidence now forced into a shape that fit the new reality. Then, perhaps you should have made that clear earlier, he said, the words intended to regain ground, but landing somewhere else entirely, because they revealed more about him than they did about her. Ava met his gaze for just a moment, her expression calm. But this time there was something else there, not defiance, not anger, but clarity. I was clear when it mattered, she replied, and the sentence did not rise, did not push, but it held, firm and exact, and for a second Dr. Hayes had no answer. Because the truth, when delivered without aggression, leaves very little room for argument. The commander watched the exchange with a quiet understanding, as if he had seen this dynamic play out in different forms before, in different rooms, where titles spoke first and truth had to wait its turn, and then he shifted slightly, enough to draw attention back to him, not with force, but with presence, Out there, he said slowly, choosing his words with care. No one asks who you are before they trust what you do. And that sentence moved through the room like a mirror, reflecting something none of them could ignore. Ava did not respond. She did not need to, because the moment had already spoken for her. The monitor continued its steady rhythm in the background, a quiet reminder that the outcome had already been decided by action, not assumption, and one by one, without announcement, without acknowledgement. The room adjusted. A nurse handed Ava a chart without hesitation. Another followed her earlier instruction without question. Even Dr. Hayes stepped back half a step, subtle, almost invisible, but enough to signal what had changed. Ava did not claim the shift. She did not step forward into it. She simply continued, because that was what she had always done. And in that quiet continuation, the room began to understand something it had overlooked from the start. Power is loud, but truth does not need to be. It only needs to be right at the moment it matters most. The room no longer felt like a place where decisions were being questioned. It felt like a place where they were being followed, quietly, naturally, as if the shift that had happened could not be undone even if someone tried. Ava Brooks moved with the same calm precision as before, adjusting details, checking readings, her focus anchored in the present while everything around her slowly reorganized itself, not through orders, but through understanding. The commander watched her with a steady gaze, no longer searching, no longer confirming, just observing with the kind of respect that does not need to be repeated, and that presence alone continued to influence the room in ways no one could ignore. Dr. Hayes stood slightly to the side now, his posture no longer leading, but no longer resisting either, caught in that space between what he had believed and what he could no longer deny. His eyes followed Ava as she moved, studying not just what she did, but how she did it, the absence of hesitation, the clarity in every motion. And for the first time, he was not evaluating her based on assumption. He was learning, though he would not say it out loud. One of the younger nurses approached Ava carefully, handing her an updated chart without needing to be asked, their eyes meeting for just a second, not in hierarchy, but in quiet acknowledgement, and Ava accepted it with a small nod, nothing more, because she understood that respect does not need to be announced. It reveals itself in small actions, in who people choose to listen to when it matters. The steady rhythm of the monitor filled the space again, no longer a warning, but a constant, grounding presence. And in that rhythm the tension that once defined the room began to dissolve, replaced by something steadier, something aligned. The commander shifted slightly again, stronger now, more aware, his voice low but clear as he spoke. You never asked for credit back then either. And the sentence carried a memory with it, something deeper than the room could fully grasp. Ava paused for just a fraction of a second, her hands still, her gaze lowering briefly before returning to the present. It was not about credit, she said, her voice even, almost quiet, but carrying the kind of certainty that does not need reinforcement. And that answer settled into the room like a final piece of a puzzle falling into place, because it explained something they had all been trying to understand without knowing it. Why she had not defended herself earlier, why she had not corrected them, why she had simply acted when it mattered most. Dr. Hayes let out a slow breath, almost unnoticed, as if releasing something he had been holding on to, his voice softer now, stripped of the edge it once carried. We misjudged you, he said, the words simple, but heavy, because they did not come easily. And for a moment the room stilled again, not with tension, but with recognition. Ava looked at him, not with triumph, not with resentment, but with something far quieter, something that did not need to prove anything anymore. You saw what you expected to see, she replied, and the sentence did not accuse, did not confront. It simply revealed, and in doing so, it left no room for denial. The commander watched the exchange with a faint shift in expression, not quite a smile, but something close, because he understood what that moment meant, not just for Ava, but for everyone in that room. The kind of moment that changes how people see, not just her, but themselves. And as the room settled into this new balance, something became clear without anyone needing to say it. The authority had not disappeared, but it had been redefined, no longer based on title alone, but on truth proven under pressure. Ava stepped back slightly once more, returning to the edge of the space she had reshaped without ever claiming And in that quiet movement, she left behind something far more powerful than recognition. She left behind a standard, one that could not be unseen, one that would remain long after the moment had passed. The room did not go back to what it was before, because once something real is seen, it cannot be unseen. The steady rhythm of the monitor continued like a quiet reminder that the moment had passed, but its impact had not. Ava Brooks stood near the edge now, no longer at the center, yet somehow more present than anyone else in the room, not because she demanded attention, but because she had changed what attention meant. The commander rested back slightly, his strength returning in measured breaths, but his awareness remained sharp, his eyes still finding her without effort, as if her presence anchored something beyond the physical. Dr. Hayes adjusted his coat slowly, a small, almost insignificant gesture, yet it carried the weight of someone recalibrating, not just his opinion of her, but his understanding of how quickly he had been wrong, and that realization did not come with noise. It came with stillness, the kind that forces reflection. One of the nurses spoke softly to another, their tone different now, not dismissive, not casual, but careful, as if the space itself had become something to respect. Ava glanced at the monitor one last time, confirming what she already knew, stable, steady, controlled. Then she turned slightly, preparing to step away fully, to return to the role they had given her at the start of the day. But something stopped her. Not physically, but in the way the room shifted again, subtle, almost invisible. The commander's voice followed her, calm, grounded. "They will remember this," he said, not loudly, not dramatically, just as a fact. And Ava paused, her back still half turned, because she understood what he meant, not just this moment, but what it represented, how quickly perception can collapse when faced with truth, how easily respect can be misplaced when it is built on assumption. She turned her head slightly, just enough to acknowledge the words, her expression composed, thoughtful, not triumphant, because this was never about winning. It was about being right when it mattered. Dr. Hayes stepped forward again, but this time there was no resistance in his posture, only intention. "If you are willing," he said, his voice quieter than before, "I would like you on this case moving forward." And that sentence carried more than an offer. It carried recognition, the kind that is not given lightly, especially by someone who had stood on the other side of it just minutes ago. The room waited, not with tension, but with curiosity, because this answer mattered in a different way. Ava looked at him for a moment, not measuring the offer, but understanding it, understanding what it meant for him to say it, and what it would mean for her to accept it. Her gaze softened just slightly, not from emotion, but from clarity. "I am already on the case," she replied, and the words landed with quiet precision, not correcting him, but redefining the moment entirely, because she had never needed permission to do what was right. And that truth settled into the room like a final shift that no one could undo. The commander's expression eased, a subtle acknowledgement passing between them again, something unspoken but fully understood. And as Ava finally stepped away, not as someone dismissed, not as someone overlooked, but as someone fully seen, the room did not return to its previous rhythm. It adjusted to a new one where titles spoke a little less loudly, and action spoke just a little more clearly. And in that space, something lasting had been left behind, not a victory, not a moment, but a standard, the kind that lingers long after the story ends, because respect, once earned in silence, does not need to be repeated to be remembered.